Welcome to Business Statistical Analysis video number 15. And in this video, we got to talk about visual spread in the data using a 5-number summary and a box plot, or as it's called in the Excel charting wizard, Box and Whiskers Chart. And here's a peek at this awesome visualization that helps us see the spread in the data. And we have an awesome Power Query bonus in this video because we're going to get data that looks like this, where we have test results from 5 CPA exams, but they're in 5 different columns. Now, we can get the chart to work from this data, but usually it's easier to have Power Query convert this improper data set into a proper data set, because then the visual is easier to create. Now in this video, you're going to be given CSV data that you need to import. And this data contains CPA Certified Public Accounting test data. And there was test number 1 to 5. Now back in video number 12, you learned how to create a 5-number summary, which we're going to do here based on the CPA data. We'll make a few other calculations, and then we'll create 2 different box plots using the Box and Wisker Chart in Excel. Now here's a Box and Wisker Chart that shows the CPA data for test number 1. Now you can see the box here and the whiskers above and below. Now the box is made up of quartile 1, 2, and 3. That represents from about 60 to about 42, the middle 50% of the data for test number 1. The X represents the mean. Since this is the median and the mean is below the median, that means there's probably some small values pulling the mean down away from the median. Now the whiskers on the bottom side and the top side, that marks the point at which anything above or anything below is considered an outlier. That means an extremely small or extremely large value. Now let's go over to the sheet 5-number summary box plot. Now we're going to import our data into cell B20. Now when you download your CSV data from either the People website or the link below the video, you save it to your folder. And to remind you what CSV data is, I'm going to right-click, Open With, in either Notepad or WordPad. And there you go. Field names in the first row, records in subsequent rows, and the commas in comma-separated values, that's what separates all the bits of data. We go to the Data Ribbon tab, and in the Get and Transform group, we click From Text CSV. In the Import Data dialog box, you navigate to your folder, select the file, click Import, or just double-click. There's the name of the file, and we want to make sure that the delimiter is a comma. It is. Click Transform Data, not Load. In the Power Query Editor window, I'm going to rename this from CPA Score Data, which is a fine name, but I'm going to call it CPA Score Table, and Enter. You can see it found the source, promoted the headers, and changed the data types. All of this data comes as an integer, so the data type 1, 2, 3, that's the icon for whole number. By the way, you can see here in this Power Query window, which is in our Excel file, that's the query we created in an earlier video, video number 9. This is the query we're creating in video number 15. Now we want to load it, so we go to Home, Close, Close and Load, and we want Close and Load too. In the Import Data dialog box, we want to import it as an Excel table. I'm going to put it on the existing sheet, B20. Click OK. Now our data comes with 5 separate columns. We're going to first use this to create our 5-number summary and then the first chart. And then I'll show you a great trick based on the query we have here that'll allow us to transform this from 5 columns to a proper data set 2-column with just the test name and the scores. Now, I am going to make you do all the formulas to calculate the 5-number summary and some of the calculations inside the chart. But the chart doesn't need all those calculations because it'll make all the calculations for us. But we definitely want to calculate them off to the side so we understand what's happening inside the chart. Now, the first thing is I want these labels, 5 of them, listed across the top. So in the top left cell, we'll type an equal sign. And this is an Excel table. So when I highlight the entire set of field names, you can't really see it there because it's blue on blue. But up in the formula bar, you can see the name of the table and then the table syntax, which says, please get all of the field names or column headers. Now, guess what? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items. So, of course, this is a formula. When I hit Enter, it spills the results to the side. Now, all of the spilled array formulas that we've done so far spilled down, but you're totally allowed to spill them to the side too. Remember, for a spilled array formula, when I click in the top left cell, that's where the formula lives. In any of the other cells, the formulas are grayed out. It's like they're ghost formulas. But that's a convenient trick of getting the field names from this table into our report area. Now notice we have 5 columns here, and there's 5 columns over here, which will be convenient for our formula. We want the 5-number summary, so we're going to use the quartile function.inc, the array, and this is an Excel table, so I use my downward pointing arrow on the first column and click. Notice the syntax, table name, and then field name in square brackets. And the cool thing about this table formula for the column is when I copy it to the side, this will move to the side like a relative cell reference, comma. And for quartile, I want all 5 numbers. So I'm going to highlight the 0 to 4 I put off to the side, and then hit the F4 key. That'll lock it. So when I copy the formula to the side, the inputs for the quartile will remain locked. Close parentheses. And this is a spilled array. So when I hit Enter, I get the min quartile 1 to 3 and the max value for test number 1 spill down the column. You can see I'm in the cell below the top cell. The formula is grayed out. But I want to copy this formula, so I click in the top cell, point to the fill handle with my crosshair or angry rabbit, and click and drag. Man, that is fast and easy. We created the 5-number summary for all 5 tests. Now we can click in the last cell, and when we hit F2, you can check the references. And sure enough, that's looking at test 5, and the quartiles are looking at our numbers 0 to 4. Enter. Our next goal is to calculate the mean for each CPA test score. So we'll use the average function. And at the top of the field, I'll select the entire column. And because we're using the whole column, we need to enter the formula and copy it to the side. Go to the last cell and hit F2. Make sure it's got test number 5, and it does. Now here's a look at the chart we're going to create later. And the box area, we've calculated all the numbers we need for that box area. Quartile 1 to quartile 3. If I point to the edge, you could see 59. That's quartile 3. There's the median, 50. Quartile 1 is 42. And if I hover over the x, there's the 49. Now the next thing we need to do is calculate this line with the outlier marker. So anything above or below will be considered an outlier. Now there's a number of different ways to calculate an outlier. Last video we talked about using standard deviations. Anything below -3 or above +3 standard deviations is oftentimes considered an outlier. One way to calculate an outlier is to take the inner quartile range, multiply it by 1.5, and then subtract it from quartile 1 and add it to quartile 3. So that's what we're going to do. Now the inner quartile range is simply, hey, quartile 3 minus quartile 1. So we get an inner quartile range of 17. Now for the lower outlier hurdle, we have to take quartile 1 and then subtract 1.5, so minus 1.5 times the inner quartile range. So we get 16.5. That'll be our lower hurdle. And then we take quartile 3, and we're going to add 1.5 times our inner quartile range. So we have 84.5. Now, the charting engine does not calculate these two hurdles exactly the same way. If I hover, it looks like it got 84 here, and here it got 17. But it's close. Now, we could count how many outliers there are below and above these two markers. To count with a condition, we use the COUNTIFS function. Criteria range. Well, for this cell, I want test number 1, comma, and the criteria. Well, it's got to be less than that number right there. And in COUNTIFS and other functions like SUMIFS, MINIFS, MAXIFS, you have to put the comparative operator inside of double quotes. And then you have to join it using the ampersand or join operator, Shift 7, to the lower limit. Now, the way I think of this is notice the smaller side of this comparative operator is pointing over towards the column. So it's saying, hey, I'm going to find things over in this column that are less than whatever that hurdle is. Now, when I hit Enter, I get a count of 11. Now, if you look over in the chart, I only count 9. And that's because there are some duplicates. And you could prove this to yourself. Now, we're going to use the filter function. The filter function will allow us to take the whole column. So in array, we'll select the whole column, comma. And for include, we need to build a logical test that has a bunch of trues and falses the same exact size as that full column. So I'm going to say, hey, full column, how many of you are less than the hurdle? Now, there's an important Excel formula lesson here. When you're building a direct logical test, you do not put the comparative operator in double quotes and join it. You simply put whatever you're trying to compare on either side of the comparative operator. So when I close parentheses, that's the full list. I can count, and I get exactly 11. And sure enough, I count 9 over here, 11 over here, but there's one duplicate and a second duplicate. Now, just to emphasize, when you use a comparative operator in the criteria argument of COUNTIFS and other functions, you have to put the comparative operator in double quotes and join it to the cell. But with a direct logical test, you don't have to do that. All right, let's count above. So we'll use COUNTIFS. Criteria range, we're still looking at test number 1, comma. And in double quotes, now I have to point the bigger side to this full column and say, hey, which ones of you over there are bigger than? So in double quotes and join it to the upper hurdle. And so we get a count of 3. We could see, sure enough, there are 3 over here. Now, I want to copy these in F2. And you could just copy this formula over. But if you want to spill it, notice there's a bunch of quartile 3s. There's a bunch of quartile 1s. So I'm going to double click to replace it, and then click and drag. Do the same thing for J22. I have it highlighted, so whatever I do next is going to replace it. Click and drag. And so now we have an array on both sides of a math operator. So it'll take the corresponding elements, subtract, and when I hit Enter, it spills the results. Over here, it took 69 minus 54.5, which is 14.5. Now here, I want to hit F2. You could copy this to the side, but you'd have to lock that J32 there. Instead, let's spill it. I'm going to double click the J22, select all the quartile 1s, double click J26, select all the interquartile ranges. Here we have a full range minus a single item, so that single item will be used in every single calculation. And then because there's a spilled array in cell J26, we see that syntax there. When I hit Enter, it calculated the lower outlier hurdle for all 5 tests. For test 5, it took 54.5 and then subtracted 1.5 times 14.5 and got 32.75. Similarly here, if you wanted to do the old school method, you just lock that and copy it to the side. But here we can spill it. Those are all of the quartile 3s. Here are all of the interquartile ranges. And when I hit Enter, I've spilled the results. For test 5, it took quartile 3, 69, and added 1.5 times the interquartile range, 14.5, and got 90.75. Now, if I hit F2 here, I cannot spill this one. It's just like this one up here. We need to copy this to the side so that the column reference will move. So I can select both of these, which are the COUNTIFs, and copy them to the side. Go to the last cell, hit F2. Sure enough, it got it right. F2, it got it right. Now, I made you create all the formulas for the 5-number summary and all of the individual calculations that are in the box plot chart. But we actually do not need to do these in the worksheet to get the chart to work. But we did them so that we understand how the numbers in the chart were calculated. But now the easy part. We click in a single cell in our data set, Insert tab in the ribbon, Chart Group, and from the Statistics dropdown, we want Box and Whisker. Now, this is the start to our 5 box plots. And the most important thing is that if you hover over the different elements, it made all of these calculations from the raw data. Now, when you have multiple columns like this, it doesn't put labels down in the horizontal axis. Well, we can come up to the green plus and add a legend. That'll color code the test names. This is a legend, so I'm going to select it. Control-1 to open up the task pane. And I'm going to show it at the bottom. We don't need the default axis with the number 1, so we'll select it and then use the delete key. The chart title for this box and whisker plot does not allow you to create a formula to link to the cells, which is how we did all of our chart titles before. So you either have to type it out, or I have it in a cell. So in edit mode, I'm going to highlight it, copy, enter, click the chart title, click again to get inside, highlight the default chart title, and Control-V. Now, when I click off to the side, there's my title. Now, the charting engine made all of the calculations for us. And as you remember from video number 12, when we're calculating quartiles and the related numbers, we can choose to do exclusive or inclusive. By default, this chart does exclusive. And we did inclusive up here, so we want to change that setting. We select one of the box plots. Control-1, and in the task pane, in quartile calculation area, you get to choose exclusive or inclusive. We're going to choose inclusive. You can also choose to show various items in your chart or change the gap width. If you increase this, the width of the box plot gets smaller. But because this data set has 5 different fields, we have to change the calculation setting for each box plot. So I have to select the box plot, come over and click inclusive, and do that for each box plot. We will not have to do this when we convert our 5-column data set into a proper data set. When we have a proper data set, it will be much easier to create the chart. But there you go. If I click off to the side, there's my finished 5 box plots. And now we can compare the 5 different tests. Well, some of the patterns we can see in the spread of the data, it looks like for the first 4 tests, that middle 50% of the data set all seem to be hovering between 60 and 40. There also seems to be a bunch of really low outliers for all the tests. And that makes sense because the x, which is the mean, it's below the median on every single test except for test number 2, which means some small values are pulling the means down away from the median. And it looks like the candidates on test number 5 did a lot better than the other 4 tests. Where here's the marker, the third quartile, where 75% of the values are below. That's a lot higher than for any of the first 4 tests. We can also pick out what looks like the max of 96. And right here, it looks like we have a 0. That's the min. Now, the last thing we'd like to do is convert this improper data set to a proper data set and then recreate this chart from a different source of data with a different structure. Now, what we're given is this improper data set with a pivoted column or field. This field is a unique list of items which should be in its own column called CPA test or test name or something like that, where all of the CPA test names are repeated. Then in the score column, the scores are listed. Now, technically what that means is we have to take the 5 field names, repeat them, take the first record, show those in the score column, then go back, get the field names, list those in the CPA test column. From record number 2, we take the scores and show those in the score column. And then we do that for every single record in the table. Notice in both examples, there are only 2 variables, the name of the test and the score. And the problem is, when we get data like this, the data analysis tools that we use in Excel are much more difficult, if not completely impossible to use with this improper data set. When we get a proper data set like this, every single data analysis tool in Excel can be used on this type of data. So we'll use Power Query to go from this improper data set, and we will unpivot into a proper data set. Now, I don't see my queries pane, so I want to go up to Data, click Queries and Connection. That opens the pane. We already created this query, which connects to the CSV file. But now I want to reference this query and then change the table. To do that, we right-click, and when I click on Reference, it'll create a third query in this Excel workbook. So I'm going to click Reference. Now, over on the left, you can see 3 queries. I want to immediately come up and rename this query. Call it CPA Score Proper Data Set and Enter. Now, notice there's only one step, and it says Source. And up here, that's a reference, just like you do a cell reference in the Excel worksheet, except for it's pointing to this query right here. Now, let's select the query on the left. And all we want to do is select all 5 columns. So I'm going to select the first column, hold Shift, click on the last column. And what I really want is one column that lists the tests and all of these values in a single column called Score. And the goal is very difficult if we had to do it by hand, but very simple in Power Query. The goal is to take the 5 field names, test 1 to 5, list them in the test column, and then in the score column, list the 5 scores for record number 1. Then we have to repeat the 5 field names in the test column and the 5 scores from record number 2 in the score column, and then repeat that all the way down. So the field names, all 5 of them, have to be matched up with the 5 numbers from each record. And the feature we use to accomplish this is called Unpivot Column. So we right-click any one of the fields, right-click, and there it is, Unpivot Columns. Now when I click, that is magic. We have test 1 to 5 with the scores from the first record. 1 to 5, the field names with the values from record number 2, all the way down. Now that's the second step. And we want to rename these fields. So I'm going to double-click Attribute and call this Test Name and Enter. We'll rename Value, something like CPA Score, and Enter. Now we have a third step. Now this proper data set will allow us to create that chart with only a few clicks. And all the data analysis features in Excel, and all tools for that matter, almost always work better if you have a proper data set. Now let's close and load. So I'm going to click Close and Load dropdown, Close and Load to. I want to import this as an Excel table on this existing sheet. And we'll scroll way over, some cell over on the right. I'll select Z28 and click OK. Now, here's how easy it is. I'm going to click in a single cell, Insert, back over to our Box and Whisker, click. Now I'm going to cut this, Control X, and paste it over here, Control V. And because we had a proper data set, the names in the horizontal axis are already listed. And when we need to change all the box plots from exclusive to inclusive, I can click any one, which selects them all, Control 1, and then click Inclusive. And all the box plots are changed. The last thing we need to do is give it a good chart title. So I'm going to copy this. And in the chart title, Control V. And there we go. With just a few clicks, we have all 5 box plots. All right, in this video, we had a lot of fun with visualizing spread in the data with box plots. We actually did a bunch of calculations with array formulas and our COUNTIFS. And we saw how to use Power Query to not only import from a comma-separated file, but how to reference and then convert the 5-column table into a proper data set. All right, that's it for Chapter 3. Next chapter, Chapter 4, we'll start talking about probability. All right, we'll see you next video.